Ivan, you're on mute.
And also, if we could keep an eye on the folks that are still dropping in. And I think if we can just silence their mics and then reopen them when we do the activity, that would be great. But we're recording, so 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, welcome everybody. I'm very excited to see so many people here. We were actually just looking at some key resident leaders who have a lot of influence in the neighborhoods. But gosh, we've gone beyond our estimated amount of people that were going to participate. So good problem to have. I think especially I feel inspired by the fact that I see so many people from so many different sectors, and what's bringing us together maybe different ways of looking at the situation at hand. But what it really does show is that, gosh, we care about our city. And so I feel very inspired to see this. We will get started on the presentation because I think we spend a little bit of time on the drop-ins. Before I share a little bit about the theme for tonight, I want to just kind of present myself for those of you that don't know me. My name is Ivan Paz. I am on staff with Every Neighborhood Partnership.
Hello.
Every Neighborhood Partnership has been around for 15 years and has been working closely with residents, doing everything from relationships to advocacy work to even empowering and funding residents who are launching stuff in the communities to make sure people have great schools, great health, and great neighborhoods. One of the main project that I'm responsible for is called CLUA, the Community Land Use Academy. You guys, everybody on this list will eventually get an email from me, whether it's whether it's recruiting people for our Land Use Academy trainings, or maybe things like this. And so this particular event tonight is more of a public educational event where we want our communities to understand what's at hand. We had a conversation with the Greenfield Coalition, so that's how this idea of bringing people together around a very important issue, an issue that's going to be looked at by City Council in a few weeks. We'll hear more about the timing. We'll hear more about what's actually in play. But I want to say thank you, Greenfield Coalition, Keith Berthold, Keith Ford. Y'all will be doing the presentation today. I want to give a special thanks to Christian Gonzalez, who kind of coaches me all the time on how to run all these crazy systems. You're doing a great job. Thank you for coaching me. I've learned a lot today. Also want to say thank you to Maria. Maria's our translator. For those of you that are not on the Spanish channel, you really need to meet this young lady. She's a great translator. Radiant Valley Translation is the name of her company. And I want to give a special shout out also to community leaders who have been on the ground, who sometimes have an obstacle of the English language, namely Juana Iris and Benita, and then also Lilia Becerril, who have championed really like creating movement in the neighborhoods. So I just want to pay my respects publicly, say thank you to all of you. And last but not least, of course, Carl Gurney and the CLUA team. So CLUA, I see some of you are here, some of you or some of your cohort members could not make it tonight, but they will be watching the recording. And then at the end of it all, I just want everybody to pat themselves on, well, you don't have to pat yourself on the back, but if you can figuratively see that, pat yourself on the back because you care about our city and how we get to actually respond to there. The pathways are different, but it's really beautiful when we are able to see our interests align. And tonight, our interest is in hearing folks from the Greenfield Coalition. I'll let them get started in a second, but most of you saw the Eventbrite. You probably saw some type of social media outlet out there kind of broadcasting the event. I'm very grateful for Christian who helped me bring all of those different types of applicants together. But tonight, I just want to make it clear. Every neighborhood partnership is, we really care about people understanding the situations at hand that challenge our communities. We're also really committed to providing trainings and so forth. But tonight, they have sent me to host this public presentation, which is going to be actually presented by the Greenfield Coalition. So just to be clear, this presentation is really rooted in the work of the Greenfield Coalition. Really tonight, what they're going to be covering is the Southeast Development Area, which we call SEDA, which is the Southeast area, part of like Fresno, that there's a lot of there's been a lot of planning over the years about what should go out there, but there is a proposed Mega-Suburban Development Plan. And this suburban development plan is really, it's a huge expansion of Fresno. It's probably like the size of Clovis, which has many implications on what that means for those of us that live in neighborhoods that have historically been disenfranchised and also overlooked. We will engage in respectful and fair discussion around the issue. So after our little activity, Greenfield Coalition will present. We'll open it for Q&A. But I think what I want to do here, especially since there's a lot of folks, I want to be clear. This space is a learning. It's a learning space. So a couple of navigating. I don't know. I don't like the word rules because I'm such a rebel sometimes. But some navigating principles would be: number one, this is to learn today. We will invite you to action making or taking action, and I will do some follow up on that. But I want people to learn today because I want to learn. But number two, this is not the space to speak truth to power. That time will come, and there are so many creative ways to do that. I personally like, black birds, but I'm not going to get into what that means. However, this is not the space to speak truth to power. However, it is the space to ask very good questions. And so I think during Q&A, if you could create a list, and by the time we get there, I would encourage you to choose your top question if you have a million like I do. And hopefully we can get some answers to that. So this is really a community event. It's not led by the city. It's not led with any type of connection to that. This is a learning event. Can I get a raise of hand if you can agree to those principles? Thank you. And those of you that did not raise it with an emoji, I saw your hand, or I saw your comment in the chat box. All right. Well, let's get started. And sorry, Keith, but I want to put the community first real quick. And what I want to ask is very, very briefly, like 5 seconds. All right. I don't know if this is going to work, but I'm going to take the chance, because knowing Keith, he would have asked you for a bio, and we don't have the time for that. So why don't you say your name, your organization, but if you're not an organizational leader, what neighborhood you're from. If you're not sure what neighborhood, your elementary school normally would be the name of the neighborhood. All right. So again, name, organization, neighborhood, 3 to 5 seconds. Well, maybe Ivan, just 5 seconds.
Ivan, I'm so sorry, but I'm actually going to interject. Now I'm going to ask for everyone instead, as you've been doing it. So introduce yourself in the chat and your organization in the chat. And if you're not part of an organization, then like what part of the city you live, what's your neighborhood? Just because we are at 619 and we have a lot of content to run through. So sorry.
Oh, sorry, not sorry.
You're sorry, not sorry. But I think, yeah, we need to move along.
All right, cool. Well, then let's just get right into it. We will follow up. We will be interacting. So I guess Keith and I and others will get to know you at some point. So, all right, Keith, take them. Or Keith.
We'll do it. So can everybody hear me okay?
Yes, we hear you, Keith. You're good to
What
go.
is what is the plural of Keith?
Really, right? So there's Keith Bergthold and Keith Ford tonight. So when I'm starting something, Keith Ford is the other Keith. When he starts something, I'm the other Keith. So just so you know. The thing I want to stress from the beginning is that we anticipated the city coming out with the Southeast Development Area Plan nearly 2 years ago. And we strategized around the idea of what's the most effective way for the community to engage a 9,000 acre annexation with 45,000 units and literally billions and billions of dollars of investment that we thought should be, probably more appropriately focused on the center of our city, in our existing neighborhoods, our existing business areas and things like that. So we formed the Greenfield Coalition as a group of people who then went and got a grant. And the grant allowed us to do a study. And if you'll go to Greenfield Coalition, just Google it, Greenfield Coalition Fresno, you'll see the urban decay study. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. But we led with a scientific study of the urban decay and blight and what's caused it in Fresno, because it's accumulating. Everybody knows it's there, but we didn't know how to talk about it in a way that would make a strong case for addressing that instead of just growing. And so we did the urban decay study, and it linked our 7 decades of accumulating urban decay and blight to our history of urban sprawl. And that means going out and converting vineyards and orchards to new housing. So that was a key thing. And we kind of stopped there at a moment, got that out there in August. And then the city came out with their plans for the Southeast Development Area in July. And we gathered together and wrote letters and analyzed the plans and built a lot of additional partnerships. And I think it's really important for you to know that this is a very diverse partnership. I mean, it's got institutions, school districts, and we've got unions, and we've got neighborhoods, and we've got a number of business people that just really want to see Fresno be healthy and prosperous for everybody. And so the bottom line is the Greenfield Coalition sponsored this study, and some of us in the Greenfield Coalition have really done a lot of work to analyze things. People like Patience Milrod, attorney, Keith Ford from the Labor Council and from the State Center Federation of Teachers, people who helped Hector Chavez from Hidalgo with the urban decay study, Joe White from Neighborhood Church. We have all kinds of people. Anyway, you have to go and look at the list. I think Simon Biocel's on tonight. There's just a lot of people who really care about Fresno and got this thing launched. So I think the best thing to do is to just understand that framework, that we've been looking at this for a couple of years almost, and have got to this point where the city came out with plans that we've analyzed, and we're not trying to necessarily stop the plans dead. We're trying to pause them to get the proper analyses, comprehensive assessments, and make sure there's some kind of mitigation fees that come back and make investments in our inner city for streets and housing and economic development. So that's kind of the gist of it. We'll talk more about that in a few minutes and some of the details, but I'm going to launch this PowerPoint, and Keith, I'm going to let you do the first part of it, and then we'll just comment on different slides together. Does that sound okay?
Sure, sounds good. Any
other comments you want to make about the Greenfield Coalition?
No, but it might be good for Christian if you could announce the interpretation one more time. We had some people that were confused in the chat.
Thank you, Keith, and thank you for your help on the chat and using your bilingual skills, Keith. Para aquellos que van entrando, we still have folks coming in. Para aquellos que van entrando y necesitan interpretación, por favor, vayan al globo que va a estar abajo de su pantalla, presiónenles y vayan a donde dice Spanish. Ya tenemos a nuestra traductora, María, interpretando para la noche de hoy. Si necesitan ayuda, por favor, pónganlo en el chat. Nuevamente aprecio a aquellos que son bilingües y están ayudando como Keith y Jacqueline para que nuestros vecinos de habla español puedan tener interpretación. Nuevamente, los que van entrando necesitan interpretación en español, vayan al globo al final de la pantalla, presiónenle y presionen español. Ya tenemos a María que nos está interpretando.
Gracias. Okay, we can get started. Yes.
Okay, so this is about how our city gets planned and developed. And this is about the Southeast Development Area. Does that work for everybody?
I can see it.
Okay.
So,
Keith,
all right,
why don't you
so
start out?
there we go. All right. Well, thank you for being here. Thank you for inviting me. I've been to a few of these groups, and I'm always really encouraged to see just how broad and how deep the interest is in helping the neighborhoods and helping protect Fresno for the people. So this is a presentation that I put together in partnership with other people in the Central Valley IAF, who I also represent, and a presentation that I gave last night for my labor union, State Center Federation of Teachers, which is why you have the two different logos there. Next slide, if you would, please, Keith. So this is, Yvonne already kind of gave a little bit of information. It's a presentation on SEDA, the Southeast Development Area. And we can go a little bit further. I think that it's useful, even though this is a slide that was for our union, I think it speaks to the depth of the Greenfield Coalition, that you've got organizations that are not normally interested in these things, or interested in land use specifically, talking about this. So the Federation is my labor union, State Center Federation of Teachers, which is the teachers union that represents all of the community colleges in the Fresno County and Madera County area. And so part of our focus for these last few years has been to begin to look out into the community, not just so that we can have better allies, but so that we can be better allies. That's how Keith and I have begun working together. That's how I know a lot of you. And I mean, it sounds fairly obvious, but a lot of you and a lot of your children are going to come to our colleges. So we need to be more invested in our communities than we have been. And we've been trying to make more deliberate inroads into that. And then we all know this, but as educators, I think we felt it very sharply, right? If COVID taught us anything, we know that living conditions affect working conditions. We know that we cannot work effectively if our homes and neighborhoods are negatively impacted. And so that piece also speaks to why the Greenfield Coalition has buy-in from the Central Labor Council too. All the other labor unions are on board here. They have representation as well, because they see the same thing. If we allow our living environments to be negatively impacted, you can damn sure bet our working environments will be. Next slide, please.
So maybe before we leave that, this is just for
Sure.
people that are organizing in neighborhoods. This is about how you pick an issue and you cut the issue in a way that creates a broad base of diverse partners. If you go by yourself and you can't get a lot of people to go with you, you may not have the power at City Hall. You may not have the power you need to get the decisions you want. So what Keith's describing and what we designed into this was the idea we want something that's framed in a way that appeals to a lot of new partners to be able to get things done in our communities.
Mm-hmm. And it's been a really exciting experiment in that, because you know, the narrative with Fresno for a long time has been that it's very, very difficult to build these kinds of coalitions. But we're seeing, if you frame it correctly, it does come together. So just, this is because I was presenting to teachers and they like seeing references up front. So, but everything that we're going to refer to down in the presentation, you can see in the links later on if you'd like. So what is SEDA? SEDA is 9,000 acres of this. Go ahead and click next.
Well, and so before you do, yeah, let's keep going. That's fine.
Yeah, this is the Toca Winery area. So just a nice, pretty gesture of it. Planned to become this. So SEDA would annex 9,000 acres east of Temperance and south of Jensen. So this is in the Clovis and Sanger Unified School Districts. When completed, you're looking at 45,000 new homes that are going to house between 135 and 150,000 people, more people than Clovis currently has. So a new Clovis. And of SEDA's 45,000 planned new homes, relatively few will be multifamily, and none are designated as affordable or to low-income families. So it's mostly going to be these large single-family homes. Here's a bird's eye view. You can see kind of the purple purple and pink seahorse over on the right-hand side. So this, you can see how this it abuts up against Clovis, the boundary of Clovis. It's kind of Clovis East area. And it's really going to cut into Sanger as well.
It's really important for everybody to know too. This has been under consideration since 2002, and an MOU was developed between the county and the city that was blessed by the local agency formation commission, which approves annexations and spheres of influence in the city. This has been talked about for 20 years. So, and it's finally the plans coming from the city to consider for approval. So there's been a lot of forethought on this by the city, and some of us were even involved originally in some of the thoughts about this.
Mm-hmm. And to speak to that too, I mean, some of the issue with the current plan, the current SEDA plan, is that a lot of the decisions that are being made at the city level seem to be on 2002 to 2014 data. So they're trying to make decisions based on old demographic information and old environmental impacts. I think the next slide is just a very a good close-up. Keith, do you want to speak to this? I think you're better versed in this part.
Yeah, this is a buffer. They meant for this to be the ultimate eastern boundary of Fresno. So this was meant to be some sort of agricultural easement buffer. This is rural residential. The light yellow is rural residential that pretty much exists. This is the new South Clovis campus they're talking about building. This is Freeway 180. This is mostly Clovis Unified above Freeway 180. This is mostly Sanger Unified down here. The real intense, these are shopping centers, mixed use, real intense housing, less intense, but single family and some duplex kind of housing, etc. It actually, on its own merits, it's probably a fairly well-designed plan. The problem is it just doesn't necessarily fit the time anymore and in the relationship to our existing city's needs. So I wouldn't necessarily attack the plan, so to speak, in the sense that it was designed to create walkable environments and a number of things and some open space, but it's just a lot of new development that we don't think is necessarily needed now, and that we should focus more on fixing the problems in the existing city and making it safer and more attractive to live.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, timeliness is a very key component of this. It's just not timely anymore. It's not necessary. And so, but let's get into some of the more specifics here. So just, is it a good idea now in our current reality, right? As Keith mentioned, and Keith had a hand in designing this before, it's not an inelegant idea. It just conceptually is not the right moment. So this is kind of, we can consider this page as sort of an agenda for what we're going to go through here. So we're going to talk about environmental impacts. We'll cover air, water, and health. We're going to look at the infrastructure costs and the burdens specifically to streets, sidewalks, utilities, and schools. Then we're going to talk about who benefits and who's going to pay. And of course, so this almost doesn't need to be said, especially for those of us who live in these impacted neighborhoods, which I think is most of us. Money that the city spends on development on the outskirts means that they don't have money for streets, sidewalks, parks, schools, and everything else that needs help, that needs attention inside the city. Right? There's a finite amount of money that the city has to devote to these things. And if they move it elsewhere, all that's left in the middle is a hole.
See that, and I think that's something we should stress at this point. That's really the major issue here. And it is an important issue for neighborhoods and organizing groups and residents and existing businesses to think about. If the city is going to put a lot of money out here, because there's not enough money even now, that means that you'll get less attention to your streets, to your sidewalks, to your street trees, to your safe routes to school, to your affordable housing, to your economic development in the inner city, right? So this is something that affects everybody. This literally affects everybody. Our institutions are affected by this, our schools. They have to defend creeping blight and things like that, and a lot of other things they don't need to, that maybe if more money was spent on making the city attractive and safe, that wouldn't be their problem. So there's a whole bunch to really get everybody involved in thinking about this, and especially thinking about the kinds of dollars we're talking about, which is in the billions.
Environmental impacts. So the environmental impact report, the EIR for short, does not tell us what this development would do to the surrounding areas. It's deeply, deeply flawed. An EIR actually must include, for significant negative impacts, all feasible ways to avoid or reduce those impacts. And this is just not in place in the current SEDA plan and the current SEDA EIR. So the air, without SEDA, Fresno's air pollution will decrease by over 500,000 tons of CO2 per year in the next 12 years. Well, actually, we're getting close to 2024. In the next 11 years. With SEDA, however, Fresno's air pollution will increase by that amount, 500,000 tons of CO2 per year by 2035. So, if you want to be able to actually see the mountains, we need to organize around that. And if you like not to be able to see the G that was just taken down from the Guarantee Building downtown, here we are.
Well,
next slide, please.
Well,
Go
just
ahead.
as we're talking about this, we've read, I know I have, and I know Patience has, and a couple of other people have read all 1,000 pages of the draft environmental impact report for this thing, and it's not able to mitigate greenhouse gas emissions, and it's not able to mitigate these air quality issues. So that's just plain and simple up front. If you develop it, you're not going to be able to deal with the increased greenhouse gas emissions or the air quality issues.
And the next slide, I think, speaks a little bit more precisely to that. So also with roads in mind as well. So billions would go to SEDA, right? When would our existing streets see improvement? I mean, you can lose a small dog in some of our potholes. But it gets worse if you actually map this out. So if you're assuming an average commute of 36.8 miles per day, which is the average distance from SEDA to River Park or SEDA to City Hall, that means 2.8 million pounds of CO2 would be added to our atmosphere every day. Every day. I don't know about you, I'm not much of a math person, but I can't really wrap my head around that much particulate matter being put into the atmosphere per day. Next slide, please. To say nothing about the traffic, right? I mean, imagine 150,000 people. Well, let's say 100,000 of those 150,000 people are driving. Put all of that traffic on the 180, right? It doesn't fit. So SEDA's new town, right? I mean, this is Tesoro Viejo times about 8, is going to increase illness and death associated with air pollution. So these on the right-hand side are current numbers in Fresno County of lung and air-related diseases. We don't know how much it's going to increase that. As Keith mentioned, right, there's nothing in the plan that mentions anything about impacts to health. And part of the reason for that is that the plan assumes that all 135 to 150,000 residents are going to, and this makes me laugh every time I say it, they're all going to live, work, shop, play nowhere else in the region. They're all going to stay in that 9,000 acre area. This is not possible, right? I mean, this is Fresno. We all drive everywhere all the time. And the EIR has no impact on that, no health impact analysis saying there's no way that those people are just going to stay confined. What does that do when you actually let 100,000 new drivers with 100,000 cars out onto the roads? Next slide, please. And so here, this is a little bit harder to read, so we'll spend a little bit of time on this, but for years, the Fresno Madera area has been one of the 3 worst regions in the state for air pollution. That's kind of a no-brainer, right? We know that. Even with our improvements, our averages are still more than 10 times worse than healthy levels. And you can kind of see this over the left-hand side. You have that kind of crooked, jagged blue line. That is our particulate pollution for the last basically 20 years, from 2020 to 21. The steady line, though, at the bottom that just has the dots and is a straight line, that's where the healthy line is. So anything below that dark blue steady line is considered healthy. And so you can see, in terms of like particulate pollution, we're actually doing better. We've gotten gradually, intermittently kind of hiccuping here and there better over the last 20 years. Same thing on the far right with the ozone pollution, right? In the last 25 years, we've been gradually getting better, but even with those improvements, we are still 10 times worse than healthy levels. SEDA would be a massive backward step. Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, so there's a lot of community builders in our space, in this learning space that we talked about. There's also a lot of folks that have been, they've gone through CLUA and stuff like that. So we understand the language. There's a couple of terms that I think whenever you name a term that is kind of like a planning term, if you can just kind of define it real quick. So one would be particulate matter. Can you just share what that is and then just keep going?
Sure. So this is small particulates like that would come from CO2 emissions from a car, or any other kind of pollution that is going to get into your lungs and going to affect your health. Most of these are small enough to actually get through like a COVID N95 mask, a basic N95 mask. You'd have to have one of the painter's masks to avoid all of them. And so if you wanted to actually look at the different densities of particulate matters, you'd have to go to like the site airnow.gov. That gives a pretty good explanation of what those look like. It varies, right? If you have wood smoke like from forest fires, those are a little bit larger particles. Particles from the tailpipe of a car are smaller, and the smaller ones obviously are harder to deal with. They're more invasive, and they're more detrimental, more long-term detrimental to your health. Does that explain it?
Thank you. Oh, and I would just add, for especially I'm conscious of the farm workers in our midst and those that work in the campo. It's also pollution that drains into the soil because of the rain, later dries up, blows into the dust, and then some of us that work in the field, we breathe these little small particles that sort of tattoo our lungs. All right, we can move forward.
Sure. Yeah, and I would just to add to that too, as we get into water, that particulate matter actually can settle and cause heavy metal deposits in the soil, which gets into the watershed, which again can negatively impact our health. And we already have terrible tap water on the west side because of these kinds of things, and because the residents out there cannot usually afford the very expensive reverse osmosis filtration that is required to get those things out, they're suffering. This is one of the reasons why you can chart, lifespan by zip code in Fresno County. So this is directly from the SEDA plan. It's marvelous, right? Fresno has a low groundwater supply and must compete for limited surface water from their environmental impact report. Climate change, we know this, is going to result in a reduction in the quality of and supply of water from the Sierra snowpack. By 2050, such impacts in the Fresno area will reduce the average water supply from snowpack by to 2/3, and then by 2100, so the time that our grandchildren and great grandchildren will be seeing, could fall to less than 1/3 of historical levels. The SEDA plan just says that water infrastructure planning tasks will happen after the plan is adopted, and the city taxpayers will pay the cost, not developers. And this is a theme that if you take the time to read the entire plan, and Keith can back me up on this, it's definitely kind of kicking the financial can down the road. So the tendency is, when they admit that there is a problem, which is not all that common, but with water, they're admitting, yes, there's going to be shortages, but trust us, we'll fix it later. There's no language as to how. Keith, I don't know if you want to add to that.
I think this is another point in planning and civic participation, citizen resident participation, etc., is you really want them to provide the complete analysis now. What are the total impacts? You don't want them to say, well, we just want to approve the plan and then we'll build this in pieces and we'll deal with those impacts later. You want to know what's going to happen to your water. You want to know what's going to happen to your finances. And that's what we've requested from the city, is that the complete comprehensive analysis of all these things be completed and nothing be piecemealed or kicked down the road or punted, so that it's dealt with in pieces later on where you can't quite grasp the whole picture. And we think this is an important time to get the complete picture, see the whole picture together and make some judgments together, right? Maybe I can just take this real quickly.
Sure, go ahead.
And you can pop in, but I think this is a major approach from the Greenfield Coalition members, and some of the letters we've written and others have written, is to understand the financial impact. This proposed project in total, as far as we can tell, we don't have all the information from the city, we requested it. The city can't afford it. The city organization can't afford it. And the existing city residents can't afford it. And this is really important to understand. If they borrow money to build a lot of infrastructure to support the development of this 9,000 acres. That's money they can't spend in the existing city. That's money they can't borrow to finance infrastructure, affordable housing, and things like that in the existing city. So we really all need to be on top of that and request from the city that we see the complete picture. How much does this cost? How much is the financing going to cost? What does it crowd out in terms of other investments for our existing city? And I'll let you. I just think that's an important piece here, and we believe from everything we can understand about this that we're probably talking better than $3 billion for all the infrastructure, and that the first phase of it, the first 15,000 units out of 45,000 units, would require some kind of borrowing in the neighborhood of $1 billion, $700 million to $1 billion. And that could possibly tap out the city and its borrowing capacity for a long time. And it has other needs. We've talked about that in terms of the urban decay study. I think everybody's living in situations about that. And I just got a little message to make sure we were talking about water. There's a whole groundwater regulation thing, just going back for a minute. It's called SIGMA. It's the State Groundwater Management Act. And there's just problems with water. And I think that we really need to see the whole picture and analyze the whole picture and those kinds of things. But Keith, go ahead and talk about this. We'll talk more about the costs later on, but these are big critical factors. How much does it cost? And what's the impact of those costs on existing city services and existing city facilities?
Yeah, just to add to that really quickly, I was talking to the young guy that writes for Fresno Land, Greg Weaver, I think is his name, and he mentioned something that we hadn't even really thought of, or I hadn't paused to think about. So, not only does shopping follow development, I mean, we saw that with River Park, right? Whenever there are new houses, all the shopping moves out, and that's why we have the Blackstone corridor and the Kings Canyon corridors that are just, pockmarked and empty. But the other thing that he pointed out was all of the advances, all of the development that we've been able to see, all of the improvements that we've been able to see in downtown Fresno. A lot of that is coming from grants from the state, and a lot of that is matching grant money. And I know there are people on this call who know more about that than I do, but if the city stops investing in downtown, so will the state. And so we're going to see a deficit, an additional deficit here of state funding, and a lot of the gains that we've had in the Lowell and Fulton and downtown areas are going to be going to evaporate in terms of funding. So, next slide, please. And by the way, so Yvonne, if we say something that is a little bit too wonky, just flag me down. So
I've already made that commitment.
Yeah.
Okay.
Maybe Keith, maybe I can talk about this. I think this gets kind of confusing a little bit because you have to kind of get into the weeds. But when the general plan update was started in 2008 and 9, it was finally adopted in 2014. The baseline information for the new general plan from the state of California does the projections, the State Department of Finance. Fresno County was forecast by the state to be 1,900,000 people by 2050. Those new population projections that we discussed earlier on that came out in July of this year, right after the city issued the plans, are now saying that Fresno County will only be a little less than 1.1 million in 2060, 10 years later. In other words, 800,000 people less. Why is that important? Because when you do plans, you want to understand what the demand is for all the investing you're doing, whether it's in public infrastructure or it's in all the housing and things like that. The demand has dropped significantly in the last 13 to 15 years. What's that mean? If the city went out and borrowed $1 billion to put infrastructure out there, or even more money, there may not be demand for all that infrastructure, which means it's stranded assets. And it puts pressure on them to repay money that they don't have. They were expecting demand for people to come in and buy houses in that area and pay off the loans, which means the existing city gets a double negative. Not only does the investment go outside the existing city right now, but it loses the capacity to fund the needs of the existing city in dramatic ways, in multiples. So just so you know, the state of California is now forecast to level out. It had 39.5 million people in 2020. The state of California Department of Finance is projecting it'll be 39.5 million in 2060, 4 decades. Fresno County grows at 0.2% versus the 1.5% it was growing a mere, 13 to 15 years ago. So it's very important when you're planning things to understand what the population growth factors are and how that creates demand for what you're doing. And if that's changing, you could really have a very poor business model that could blow up, right? It could blow up on you and you'd have a lot of expenses you don't have the resources to pay off. So that's why this is so important, especially at this time, to understand these changes in demand. Keith, you want to say anything?
Well, it's a little bit like, once you get past, I don't know, 18, 19, 20 years old and you stop growing and you go, well, I'd like to get a little bit taller. So I'm going to, cut a little bit of bone out of my own hip and kind of graft it into my leg. Well, if you keep on doing that, you're going to lose your hip, right? You're going to hollow out your own body for the sake of this growth. It's not sustainable and it's not healthy.
And the projections we're talking about suggest that that SEDA would be consuming something like maybe 3 times what the county's growing. So it's just not mathematically possible.
Yeah, and I think we have more on that in a little while too. Yep. So yeah, Keith has mentioned this already. It's 2 to 3 billion estimate. In fact, it's getting closer to 3.5 is what we're hearing now.
Yep.
There's no infrastructure budget, no infrastructure finance plan, no fiscal impact analysis, and who pays? Well, actually nobody, right? SEDA's tax revenues. This is what Keith was talking about with population growth flattening out. SEDA's tax revenues will never even cover its infrastructure costs, let alone backfill to improve legacy neighborhoods like ours. There won't be any kind of surplus because there won't be enough to begin with. You have to have an overflow to have surplus, right? Go ahead and click the next one. I think there's more detail. Yes.
Well,
go ahead.
Is there someone? Go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, as you sort of showcase, or not showcase, but as you kind of introduce us to the way these kind of finances work.
That's okay.
I think
okay?
I think also. Sorry. Oh, considering that the presentation was originally for, I think you said unions. Is that what you said earlier?
One slide was union centric.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. The rest of it's for other community organizations.
Yeah. So as we talk about the finances, which is the key thing, I think Keith in our CLUA classes have mentioned, hey, systems change when you really look at the money, where the money's going, how the money's moved. But I think at some point, we have a lot of folks that are here because of their neighborhoods. And I think some of us have fought really hard over the years, some over the decades. And I think we need, as we talk about the finances, sort of contextualize it into kind of these community builders and those of us that have been in those battles.
Okay. Yeah. So there are a few other slides, but if I don't do a good job of it, just please stop me and ask more questions.
You're doing great, Matt.
Well, and just know that there's a difference between the fiscal impact analysis and the infrastructure financing. When we talk about the financing of the infrastructure, that's a one-time deal with potentially, decades of debt, right?
Right.
The fiscal impact analysis.
That's the city borrowing money to extend electricity, sewer, all of those things out into that area. That's what we mean when roads, right? That's what we're talking about when we talk about infrastructure.
The fiscal impact analysis is saying, okay, now you've got 135,000 more residents and you've got 9,000 acres you have to maintain. So you have to supply fire and police and sewer and water, and you have all these fees. Does it pay for itself? And we would suggest it does not. On an annual basis, it runs a negative. It does not pay for itself. So that's just the annual budget of fees and things like that. So if it's not paying for itself, who is subsidizing that? Existing city residents who already were beat up over the infrastructure financing plan, right? So anyway, I think this is, in terms of bringing it back down to the neighborhood level, who is paying for the quality of public facilities and services you get? And if the city can't afford to give you what you need, how are you ever going to get it, especially if they build 9,000 acres on the east end of town, right? Does that make sense? So you got to get your heads into it.
And speaking of the money and the revenue structures, so here's one of the particular problems with this kind of annexation. So when the city annexes land from the county, almost 2/3 of those revenues from the annexation stay with the county. So that means that the city bears all of that cost and risk. So all of the infrastructure costs that Keith was just talking about, all of the maintenance costs that come once you've actually got that area built, the city only keeps 38% of any revenue from that. So, and again, this is worth underscoring repeatedly, SEDA doesn't even bring in enough money, new money, to pay for itself. Fresno County's hardly growing. Keith mentioned this earlier. We're only going to grow 88,000 in the next 40 years, meaning that demand for SEDA essentially does not exist, right? I mean, so if we're talking about building enough houses for 135,000 people, again, I'm not a math person, but 135 is more than 88,000, right? 135,000 is more than 88,000. The plan also does not reveal who will pay, right? Only that those decisions will be made after the plan passes. So again, to use Keith's language, they're just punting this. And we know when that happens, what they mean is that existing residents in the existing city are going to be subsidizing that out of an already thinly stretched budget.
So a metaphor, if you'll allow, if the existing city is the trunk of the tree, and we keep growing these branches out, and the branches get all the water and all the nutrients, and the trunk starts to die, what's the point? Yeah. What is the point? Mm-hmm. And the trunk of the tree needs to be nurtured and maintained, right? And the trunk in this case is all of our existing neighborhoods and business districts that need attention and TLC and money to make sure that they are safe and attractive and help people thrive and have businesses and have families. And that's the point, right? We want to make sure there's balance here.
Well, and to go off script and to horrify that metaphor a little bit more, there's a really good chance, and this is just me talking, there's a really good chance that this bankrupts the city. I mean, actually bankrupts the city in the next 10 years, which would be terrifying, right? And it would hurt. We know who this is going to hurt, right? This is going to hurt all of the people who are already the most impacted. It's just going to make it even worse. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, so at the scale that's being proposed, I think Keith may not be too hyperbolic. He may not be using hyperbole or exaggerating. I think the city is smarter than that. And I think they've got some very bright people. They have a very bright city manager and mayor and a team, right? And I think all we've asked is that all those facts come out before you make decisions, not later. And I believe in my heart of hearts that these things are going to come out and they're going to have to address them before they adopt a plan like this, because it's just obvious to us that it costs too much and it does too much damage the way it's currently being proposed. And so, and I don't think they want to do that. I don't think there's any malice here. There's not bad people here. It's bad analysis or good analysis, or I should say complete analysis or incomplete analysis. So let's not pin this on anybody, but right. I think the idea is we all just want to have a respectful conversation about the facts, about complete analysis and having the facts.
Yeah, I would echo that. There are no villains here that at least not that we can see. What there are is people with incomplete data, right? They don't have all of the facts to make a good ethical decision, and that's what we're asking for. Give them all the facts so that then we can help them make that ethical decision, right? And also, I mean, let's be honest, it doesn't hurt, right? If we can, whenever the city council hears this, if we can get all of our networks mobilized, and we're going to talk about this in a little while, we can get all our networks mobilized, and we've got 500 to 1,000 people crammed in that chamber and out the doors and into the street saying, slow your roll, we need to do this better, that will get their attention as well. So just a really quick slide here. Fresno already has enough vacant land for housing within the city limits to accommodate nearly 3 times the population for SEDA, right? So empty houses and vacant lots that could just be developed as infill. We could accommodate, if we were going to grow 150,000 people, we could do it without extending the city limits.
And it is more expensive and it's harder to do. Let's just be real clear. It is easier and a more straightforward and less costly for the developers to develop thousands of acres, redevelop thousands of acres
Yeah.
of vineyards and orchards, right? And row crops. It's just easier, okay? And it's less expensive. But in order to create a healthy city, it might be a little more expensive to really get vacant lots and old houses that need to be rehabbed and some infill along our corridors in terms of mixed use and affordable housing. It is more expensive. But if that's the priority, I think we could pull the wagon together, right?
Well, and from a labor perspective too, yes, it's more expensive, but you also have more skilled labor involved in building up instead of out. So when you're talking about just, you know, standard foundation stick build single family homes, right, that you know a lot of us live in, you don't need skilled labor for those, right? You can pay very little and get the job done to code or, you know, close to code at minimal expense. But if you're building up or rehabilitating an old building, it takes skilled labor. It's going to be more costly, but that's actually not a bad thing when you think about, well, gee, wouldn't it be nice to be paid, you know, to be paid actually prevailing wage, so at a union rate with benefits and retirement and things like that? Yes, we want that for our
Keith,
people as well.
I don't know which Keith to ask this question, but I'm gonna just throw this question out because now that you're talking about it, I do recognize, and I want to say thanks to those connections of mine that do real estate. It's been I've had interesting conversations with them, and I think you know, there's a model of doing real estate within suburban kind of developments. But somebody, and I can't remember if it was Keith or some other Keith out in the world, but
There's only two of us. Yeah.
all right, there's only two Keiths in the world, but it just blew my mind, the idea that instead of buying, like, you know, and I'm thinking of my real estate friends again, but like instead of purchasing like 10 parcels or 10 units, like you can actually purchase one plot of land and build a mixed use development, and now you have like 20, right? I don't know if maybe this is the place, but I thought as you were talking, I was like, you know what, you're gonna ask that real quick because I know some of my friends
Yeah.
are listening.
Well, so I mean, something kind of related to that, and one of the reasons why it's good for the city to build up, it's not just economical in terms of space saving, right? But for every floor that you add, the property tax goes up. So you're going to create value on that property. This is why it's actually better for us to do that, right? Because if you have a 5-story building, you're having five times the property tax. So the city actually would get more money in the long run. I mean, if we're talking about from, you know, from a planning perspective, where we're looking 10, 15, you know, 40 years down the road, if we have more multi-story buildings, multi-story dwellings, the city is going to be recouping a lot more property tax money, and again, also saving space. So I don't know, Yvonne, if that answered your question, or Keith, if you want to jump in.
Well, I'll just add, remember the city of Fresno was incorporated in 1885. And so it's been dealing with tax sharing arrangements with the county of Fresno for a long time. When downtown was really thriving at the beginning of the 20th century, they were doing tax sharing arrangements that really favored the city. And then as time has gone by, this last tax sharing arrangement went from like 50-50, I believe, to about this 38-62 that Keith addressed. So by building in the areas closer to downtown, the city gets a lot more favorable share of the property taxes because of these historical tax sharing arrangements. So there's all kinds of reasons where you would have better economics. But again, it's one of those things that has to be everybody pulling the wagon in the same direction, helping developers, get land, finding the best ways to help them do this and those kinds of things. We can't necessarily leave them on their own. And all this stuff is subsidized. Everything is subsidized. If you think about it, if the city borrows billions of dollars to put water, sewer, storm drainage, and streets and police stations and things out in these areas, the suburban areas are being subsidized too. So let's just figure out what the best subsidy is for the most people, if that makes sense.
Thank you.
So now to come back to some of the neighborhood concerns, right? So the SEDA area is not empty of people, right? I mean, people already live there. Its current residents, most of them get their water from wells and have their own septic systems. This is kind of a hidden cost. The SEDA would require existing residents to connect to city utilities at their own cost, which could be as much as $100,000 per household. So you're looking at, I mean, if you have a septic, this is actually the graphic here kind of explains what would have to happen to connect city sewers to a septic. You're going to have to front that, actually not front that cost. You're going to have to put that cost up on your own. It's going to be tremendously expensive. And again, the SEDA plan is not really mentioning this, and there are no subsidies built into it that would have any kind of offset to those people who are already there.
And to be fair, we're not really talking or trying to represent anyone here. We're trying to represent a perspective, right, on growth and development. But there are a lot of people out there that moved out there to get away from the city.
Yep.
Just to be fair, you can understand why they may not be really happy about the city saying, "Oh, we're going to build 45,000 units out there, and you're going to have 134,000 neighbors."
Yep. One of my friends bought a 5-acre parcel out there 2 or 3 years ago, and she's like, "Oh, it's so quiet, it's so dark, I love it." She's not happy
right
about this. So just really quickly, schools. The Unified School District that stands to be most significantly impacted by this is the Sanger Unified District. It would require them to build 15 new schools, including another high school. And for those of you who live out in Sanger area, they just finished a high school. There's a brand new high school. My brother-in-law works there. The estimated cost of this to build these new schools would be $1 billion, which Sanger does not have. According to their deputy superintendent, there's just no local dollars for that. It's all dedicated. So, I mean, again, now kind of shifting our focus, we're not just talking about the negative fiscal impacts on the city of Fresno. It's also going to hit Sanger. So I don't know if we have time for this, but it might be good. And Yvonne, you can feel free to tell me no, but so far, what are reactions? And then the other question that I have is just what challenges that are your neighborhood and family facing that you would actually like the city to be investing in, that you should see them investing in?
I think it's a good time to transition into it. Thank you. Go for it.
So feel free to speak up.
Can you read the questions again?
Yeah. So maybe a couple word reactions to the presentation, and then what would you like to see us or the city investing in to help your neighborhood and your family? Lilia.
Lilia, adelante. Está en mute, si se quiere quitar de mute.
Buenas noches a todos.
Good evening, everyone.
Es mucha información la que nos están dando el día de hoy, pero
It's a lot of
tristemente al
information
empezar la
that you're sharing
conversación
with us.
miramos que desafortunadamente las personas de bajos ingresos o las familias de bajos ingresos no van a calificar. Entonces es una tristeza mirar que Fresno tiene tantísima casa vacante que están habitadas actualmente por indigentes, por decir la palabra grosera, se puede decir, que pueden meter ese dinero o invertir ese dinero en las casas que ya están vacantes aquí. Muchas familias viven como sardinas porque no hay casas vacantes, en el sentido de que todas las casas que están por corporaciones. Entonces, no es posible que puedan invertir fuera de Fresno. Nuestras familias necesitan una casa equitativa para ellos, donde ellos puedan vivir dignamente, y unas casas que sean multifamiliares. Lamentablemente, lo que están diciendo en este momento, eso perjudica a nuestras comunidades que se sienten marginadas ya, porque realmente no miramos ninguna función. Nuestras carreteras, nuestras calles están en pésimas condiciones, árboles viejos que están aquí en nuestras áreas. No hay efectivo para poder ayudar aquí. Entonces, yo fui parte del comité, no del comité, sino de los que participaron en la primera presentación que hicieron allá en el subcentro. Entonces, es una tristeza que la participación de las familias no se hizo presente. Lamentablemente, quizás no estaban bien informadas, pero créanme que es una tristeza mirar que Las familias que estaban ahí dicen, tengo 35 años viviendo en una sola propiedad y no califico porque no tengo documentos. Entonces, todo lo que
¿Pueden
ustedes están
traducir, por
invirtiendo,
favor?
lamentablemente están invirtiendo en gente que tiene dinero, no gente que tiene un medio
Lilia,
económico. Entonces,
voy a-
tenemos que ser positivos y mirar que
Lilia.
tanto gente indocumentada como documentada de
Christian, go
poder
ahead.
comprar nuestra propia casa. Así es
¿Puedo hacer
que
pausa?
piensen un poquito en el sureste de Fresno, piensen un poquito en las necesidades que tenemos aquí antes de hacer movimiento. Nuestra gente necesita respeto y yo pienso que el respeto es para todos, porque todos somos contribuyentes de impuestos y merecemos lo mismo por igualdad. Ese es mi punto de vista.
Thank you very much. I
Yes.
really appreciate that. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Pues sí, muchas gracias, Lilia, por su punto. Comentó mucho y algo que necesitamos calar es, María, si podemos también, cuando estén hablando a nuestros miembros de español, traducirlo del inglés, tú te quedas en el canal. For all of our Spanish speakers, if you can go into the interpretation globe, and so when someone is speaking in Spanish and you go into English, Maria will be translating into English, but you need to be able to make that switch. Yes, so we are learning tonight, y'all, even with our interpretation features.
You want to respond real quick, just in English?
Yes.
To Lilia also, in addition to what she's saying. But also there's some questions that are starting to drop in the chat box that I think especially the council member question is an important one. But can all the Spanish speaking folks hear me, or is it okay for me to speak in Spanish?
You can
Either-
continue speaking in English and Maria will interpret in Spanish.
Okay, great. So, for those of us that are a part of the academy, one of the things we've been exploring is what does it look like when we start drawing or pulling investment into an expansion project, a suburban development expansion project. And some of the things, yes, the market follows. So what does that mean for our neighborhoods? That means to some extent, we'll lose some level of momentum in business, or we'll start seeing empty buildings more and more, or we'll start seeing squatters in empty buildings more and more. And we know that snowballs. And I think it's important to some of the stuff that in the presentation that we were talking about was this kind of like we start building up, and so I'm glad that both Keith and Keith have kind of painted the picture of it's not necessarily an either or either. There's creativity and innovation that can happen in between, but the either or, which is just as legitimate to look at, is that suburban development does pull resources, public funds, all kinds of monies from the city, taxes. And then those of us that have been in the neighborhoods that we've been pushing to change, now we get put on pause for another season, or we'll start seeing more of the same situation multiply and multiply. And some of the solutions, so again, what I like about the presentation is not necessarily just critiquing or trying to block the suburban development, but it's saying how do we continue to advocate and bring funds to get invested in the center? And the center is obviously limited on space, and so we're talking about going upward and the benefits of going upward. Going upward means carbon monoxide goes down. To some extent, it means businesses get locked in the neighborhood. It means everybody gets an apartment, hopefully, and we're not stuck in sardine cans, like Lilia said. But then there are other things like taxing the suburban development property owners, whatever, and somehow using that somebody to bring it back to do that infill. So that word infill is also a huge word, which means instead of creating something new, put it in the center. Thank you. Next questions.
Sheila, I see your hand up if you want to unmute.
Thanks, Christine. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much to both Keith, great presentation, and Yvonne for moderating it. I just wanted to mention that Fresno is kind of repeating its history. It's very recent and modern history. I mean, a lot of history in the past, but the very recent one and all the sprawl development that is happening in Northside Fresno, in Millerton Lake area, or in Madera. I want to bring attention to the street safety, actually, the traffic and speed that all this sprawl development are adding to the existing streets. And as Fresno, it is always we just expand and widen the streets and add the speed limit, and because that's how we want to deal with the traffic and the street safety and all the accidents now we see on Bryant and 41, because of all the developments that are happening in Northside, has definitely diminished the quality of life in the neighborhoods in other side of the town. And it's just everybody are scratching their head what is happening, and it's just going to get worse and worse and worse. And it will be the same scenario once Southeast Fresno is expanded into the outer areas, and then all these cars and traffic are going to come. And not only is going to add to the pollution, but then to the safety on our streets, because people are just going to race down all these corridors and arterials to get to work, because that's what they have to do. They're living far away from the center of employment, and they have to rush to where they work. So street safety is also going to be a huge issue. I want to bring it to everybody's attention.
That's great, Sheila. Thanks.
Thank you, Sheila. Veo que la mano está levantada con la foto de la J. No sé si sea Juana o está bajo el nombre de Iván Paz, pero tiene la mano levantada. Adelante.
Sí, yo tengo la mano levantada también. Soy Juana Mesa.
Juana, permíteme un momentito y vamos a asegurarnos que María puede interpretar en inglés. English speakers, if you can change your interpretation to English, Maria will be translating what Juana says in Spanish into English.
Juana Iris is speaking.
Adelante, Juana.
Ok, gracias, Christine. Sí, mi comentario es, tengo una pregunta y tengo un comentario, ¿verdad? Que hacer. Mi pregunta es, ya nos dijeron hacia dónde se van a ir todo este dinero, ¿verdad? Hacia este proyecto, en qué se van en dónde van a meter, en qué se va a usar todo este fondo para este proyecto de SEDA, pero mi pregunta es, ¿de dónde exactamente vienen estos fondos? O sea, sabemos que alguna parte de estos fondos vienen de los impuestos que declaramos, ¿verdad? Todas las personas que estamos viviendo en la ciudad de Fresno, pero aparte de eso, ¿de dónde más están agarrando tantísimo dinero para hacer un proyecto así de grande que al final del día no va a beneficiar a todas las familias de Fresno? Esa es mi pregunta. La otra pregunta, ¿verdad? En mi comentario es, Iván acaba de mencionar, ¿verdad? Es importante que nosotros salgamos, ¿verdad? A abogar para poder parar este proyecto, porque al parecer este proyecto no está beneficiando a las familias que de verdad necesiten viviendas, ¿verdad? O necesiten lugares donde acoger a sus familias. Pero es por eso que yo quería mencionar, ¿verdad? Nosotros como organización, yo estoy representando el movimiento de los niños y nosotros vamos a tener una acción el 14 de diciembre por la mañana, ¿verdad? Enfrente del City Hall. Y es una forma que nosotros como familias, como residentes, podemos salir y abogar, ¿verdad? Y hacerles saber a estas personas que no estamos de acuerdo en este proyecto. Es un tema que también vamos a traer presente en esta acción y pues todas las familias que están aquí presentes, me gustaría invitarlas para que nos apoyen, ¿verdad? Porque en realidad este proyecto no está beneficiando, no está siendo justo para todas las familias y eso era lo que yo quería agregar en esto y sí me gustaría saber un poquito más sobre de dónde viene todo este dinero que van a ocupar para este proyecto.
Thank you, Juana. So it's worth pointing out, and maybe this is just obvious, but it's kind of how my brain works, so forgive me. But I mean, so Lilia, you spoke about this, and Juana as well. It's not like, so I mean, if all of these houses get built. It's not like because there's not enough population coming into the town, or it's not because we're not growing. It's not like those new houses are going to stay vacant, right? They will get filled by the people who can afford to move out there. They're going to go, oh, shiny new house in a new neighborhood, just like Harlan Ranch or all these other ones on the north end, and they're going to leave. And then all of their kids are going to be in these nice, clean new neighborhoods with nice, clean new schools. And all of our kids are going to be left behind, right, in neighborhoods that are even worse, in conditions that are even worse, because the people who were here with us left, right? So, I mean, even if we only grow 88,000 people, if we've got housing for 145,000, that means there's still going to be another 60,000 people who already live here who are just going to go. They're going to go, I can afford that. It looks nicer out there. And they're just going to bounce.
I think this is a great conversation, because if you think about being organized, you need to have a map of your neighborhood or the part of the city that you love and care about and you live in. And you need to know specifically what you need to be healthy and to thrive there, whether it's street repairs or sidewalk repairs or a new fire station or better street trees or more affordable housing or more opportunities for you to start a business. And those things need to be right where you can tap into that in a conversation with the city council, your council members, everybody else, and to be able to say, how do these needs, which we've identified specifically in our neighborhoods and in our existing businesses, how do those needs get met when you grow out here to the east on 9,000 acres? Mm-hmm. You know, and I think the idea is really thoughtful, well-organized people have a lot of power if they've done their homework about their neighborhood and can ask those questions in the public space. So I really support the children's movement and IF and everybody who's organizing to have specific information about their neighborhoods and their needs in the existing city to put into that public arena and say, City Council, what are you doing about this? How does the money you're spending out there help solve these problems we're living with today?
Hey, Keith, before we get to Lilia's next comment, would you mind putting the PowerPoint up just really quickly? Because there were a couple more slides that I just wanted to touch on very fast.
Yeah, and I want to make sure let's see there.
We're okay on time right now.
Yeah.
So just next slide. Lilia, we will get to you, I promise.
Yep.
Yes, I was about to say we have about 10 minutes, so yes.
Okay, great. So just really quickly, so who does benefit, right? I mean, we've already talked a little bit about who gets hurt. The real estate developers are going to be the ones that benefit. They're really the only ones. It's not going to be labor, right? I already talked about this a little bit. Building SEDA only requires low-skilled, low-paid workers. These people are not going to get retirement. They're not going to get health benefits, none of that, right? And they're not going to get a decent living wage, which we all want for all of our workers here, regardless of whether or not they're documented. Taxpayers are not going to benefit from this, right? SEDA will cost the city, again, billions of dollars that it will likely never recoup, and not existing neighborhoods, right? SEDA is also going, this is another thing that we didn't really talk about. It's also going to lower property values and empty storefronts. In fact, I think there was a comment just now about businesses closing, right? But it's not only going to, you know, businesses follow new development, right? But people who own houses now, if you're fortunate enough to own a house now, guess what? Your property value is going to crater unless we act. Next slide, please. And so these are dates to kind of keep in mind, but also, and maybe Keith can talk about this a little bit more. Is that go ahead. I'm going to let you talk about this.
Yeah, the city is still trying to generate the information they need to answer the questions we've asked about the real cost of the infrastructure, and we hope eventually about the fiscal impact analysis. The city would have had to put out a public notice last week. There's a 15-day requirement in the public notice law for there to be a planning commission meeting on December 6th. We think that also they have to meet the planning commission before they meet at the city council. So we don't think they're at this point. Stay tuned and join the Greenfield Coalition. Go on the website and join the Greenfield Coalition, because we will tell you exactly what's going on. We'll send you your emails, but we don't think these dates are valid anymore. based on our latest information, we don't think these are valid, and probably these things are probably going to be pushed into the early part of 2024 now. But this was our best information even just a month ago, that this is what we thought was going to happen. But we think that the city appropriately is trying to get the answers to some of those questions, because they don't want to have a public hearing, we don't believe, and not have the answers to these questions. Keith?
I think that's it, unless you want to.
Let me just go back to the slide before.
Wait,
and say,
did you take away the last slide?
No, I can put it on there, but I want to make sure people join IF, please
Yes.
join the Greenfield Coalition, you know, and go ahead, Ivan.
Yeah, I have just put the link to the Greenfield Coalition on the website in the chat box. Click on it and then subscribe.
Yeah, and I mean, to me, I'm sort of like agnostic. I say join the IAF, join the children's movement, join every group that you're allied with on these issues. You know, we want all these groups to thrive and prosper themselves in terms of their actions and community organizing and things like that. But I will say, we didn't put it here, and we need to put it here. What we really want the city to do is to pause this. Just press pause and roll all this into a general plan update next year. In other words, they've tried to do a one-off, 9,000 acres out of like 74,000 acres or so in the city, okay? So that's about 12%. And the analysis isn't complete. There's all these things they haven't been able to address yet. And they really need to engage the community from the very beginning of the thought process on planning. So they should take this area and include it in a comprehensive general plan update, so all of us can be part of that with them. So all of us can get the complete analyses and really begin to, take action and make recommendations for things that balance this growth and make sure our existing communities and neighborhoods get attention and those kinds of things. That's not going to happen in this SEDA process. It's not designed for that to happen. So this needs to be paused and all of it rolled into a new general plan update. The state says you should update your general plan every 10 years. Next year, our general plan will be 10 years old. So let's just advance that process, include this stuff, upgrade the analysis, and include everybody in a new general plan update so you can speak your voice into a comprehensive, adequate general plan for the next 25 to 30 years.
So, Keith, I just recognized we have 3 minutes. I'm a big believer in sort of synthesizing some of the content so that it could be accessible to people, and maybe having community groups. Some of our friends who are on this meeting kind of, they work with a lot of folks, kind of run this very simplified brochure or whatever it is, do sessions so we understand, or we can even articulate a little bit of it. That's something we can do. I want to make sure we hear from Lilia. And then I think it's good for you to share a little bit of the action, like what's next, because I will be following up with everybody on this list. And we'll call it a night. So dale, Lilia.
Sí, ¿puedo hablar ya?
Lilia
Entonces?
Leyenda, dale.
Ok. Sí, tengo la respuesta para Kate Ford. Dijo que él quería saber quién iba a invertir. Quiero que sepa que el que va a invertir van a ser los dueños que tienen propiedades en San Francisco, en Los Ángeles y en San Diego, que son donde lastimosamente las rentas son altísimas y las propiedades son muy caras. Entonces ellos son los que se van a invertir. Las casas nuevas que van a ser para que vengan nuevos inquilinos de otros condados y no de Fresno. Lamentablemente nuestra gente es pobre y no va a tener para comprar una casa. Entonces yo digo que lo que hagan con nuestros impuestos tiene que contar con nuestra autorización, ya que todos somos contribuyentes. Y este es un llamado para toda la comunidad que está presente el día de hoy, que si hoy nos presentamos en este Zoom, nos presentemos el día 14 en la ciudad de Fresno para hacerles saber a la ciudad de Fresno que no estamos solos, que contamos cada uno, como dijo alguien en el principio, uno solo no cuenta, pero somos una comunidad unida y vamos a trabajar porque esto se detenga y sigamos adelante por la dignidad para todos. Pienso que tenemos que unirnos más ante todo lo que venga, adversidades que vengan. Es nuestra tierra, se puede decir, porque yo tengo una frase que siempre la digo: Fresno es nuestro hogar y nosotros tenemos que cuidarla y tenemos que cuidar también nuestros impuestos que pagamos a este condado para que crezca, pero crezca con nuestras propias familias, que por años y décadas hemos estado trabajando porque esto crezca, pero crezca para bien de nuestras propias familias, no para que vengan familias de fuera a sentarse en el sillón de plata o de oro. ¿Ok? Entonces pienso que tenemos que unirnos el 14 de diciembre para poder hacer enfrente de la ciudad de Fresno ante los concejales que nos escuchen, que esto se tiene que parar.
Gracias, Lilian. Gracias, Lilian. Me robaste mi sermón que iba a dar en cerrar todo esto, pero me gusta más como tú lo hiciste. Tus palabras, así los voy a dejar. And Keith, I'll just close it because
just
we're
to
out
make
of
a
time.
comment, the only thing
Go
we're
for it.
sure of right now is that the children's movement is going to have a rally on the 14th. We're not sure there's going to be a city council meeting. In fact, we do not think there'll be a city council meeting on the 14th at this point. But we will tell once we know, we'll tell everybody in the world that there's been a public notice, but we have not seen the public notice yet.
Okay, so December 14 was the date we were thinking about, or we thought they were going to review this proposal. But we're not sure. I'm just repeating what you said, Keith. So we're not sure if they're going to be meeting. So it sounds like Juanaides and those folks that are working with the children's movement, they're still showing up. Is it, and it's to basically let their voices heard. Is that correct?
I believe that's correct. And they're also introducing their housing agenda. They haven't, the children's movement has a very important housing agenda, and they have connected it appropriately to the idea of the SEDA process. The issue I'm just making the point is we don't believe that SEDA will be on the city council agenda that day, but it'd be great to have a rally any day to get people's attention about what the children's movement's doing, what IF is doing, you know, what everybody's doing, right? What everybody's doing to come together, as Lilia said, you know, to really let your voice be heard about what you need in your neighborhood.
Well, if Lilia and Edis will be there, I'm going to show up as a resident as well with a lot of my network. So I'll be there.
It's great.
Have a great night. I'm very proud of us.
Thanks, Ivan, for organizing this. We appreciate the chance to share.
Thank you, Christian. Thank you, Christian. She's the beast. We all know that.
Thank you, Christian. And I appreciate the opportunity to be with the other Keith anytime.
Likewise.
It's only once in a blue moon. All right. See ya.
Bye, everybody.